I think in the way the vocabulary developed, even the International Association for Study of Commons, what we call today, was initially called International Association for the Studies of Common Property.
That understanding of commons, whether it's through collectives, whether it's through cooperatives, whether it's through common good infrastructure, and especially in areas of health and education, is where it becomes very real, given the kind of questions that you're being asked.
So-called wastelands are not actually wastelands, but just because you couldn't tax them, you put them in that category.
The so-called productivity of these lands could really be enhanced if only we had that a kind of a form of an institutional setting where it is not only governments or not only individuals, somewhere in between.
They would have access to common good infrastructure to store their produce. Then in that case, they would be able to send their kids, for better education, or there would be a longer term benefit here. It's the same way that how do you look at the ROI of saving X number of babies? You can't. It's at a society level, it's at an economy level.
Hi, I'm Kanchi Kohli, a researcher and educator. We're putting together a series of 5 episodes to understand and elaborate on the idea of commons. How are commons related to climate change? How do you see commons in urban spaces? What is the link between commons and markets? What kinds of laws and policies apply to commons? And in this framing episode, we have 2 great speakers with long, grounded work and understanding on commons. I have with me today Jagdeesh Rao, who is a part of the Common Ground Initiative, also Chief Executive of Living Landscape, the backbone organization of Common Ground. Huda, you've kept your description short, so from SELCO Foundation, seminal work on decentralized energy. So I'm really looking forward to talking to the 2 of you. So I mean, if I have to just initiate the thought, and for even initiate it for the uninitiated in many ways. The word commons is such a common word, yet it's such an uncommon word. And I'm sure you both have actually answered this question even before. But let me start with just stepping back and personalize it a little bit for you. And say, when was the first time you learned or heard the word commons? I mean, each one of you has been practitioners for a very long time. At some point of time in your personal history or your work history, you would have heard the word commons. What was your reaction? Oh my God! Or yes, it's great. And how did you actually really build it into your work? So I'll open it up to either one of you, if you would respond. Yes.
We're being nice to each other.
Yeah, go for it.
It was, I remember the date even. My first day, May 29th, 1986, when I joined the National Dairy Development Board. It was for something called Tree Growers Cooperatives, and there was a green report, 5 pages, 10 pages. It was all about reforestation on village common lands. So it sounded so natural to me. Of course, everyone will have some common lands. And then the more serious introduction happened as I started working in villages in South Andhra Pradesh. And also, this was also the times when we didn't have internet. So you had to go to books. And probably the first book that really connected to me was something called Village Republics by Robert Wade. And everything he wrote there, it was about Kanna Kadapa Canal, was about irrigation systems, but it was actually describing common pool resources and common property regime. That connected deeply to me. It was around the same time that Eleanor Ostrom, approached our project to do some 50-page survey in a few villages. And then the whole lexicon in that was all about commons. And so we realized that we are not alone. And we also realized that in 1990 or 89, the first conference on commons, International Conference on Commons, and probably the first conference. So that was my parichaya to commons.
Yeah. Okay. And did you embrace it? Did you resist it?
I thought it was so natural. Of course, we'll have common things. Yeah, and villages would have. Not everything is divided into government land or individual land. I thought, as a child also, you see the threshing floor, the burial ground, all this cannot be privatized, at least not yet in India. So this was something which came naturally to me. Of course, there would be. But the far more starker reality hit. When the project was initiated in May 89, we had the ceremonial opening ceremony. So there was Dr. Kurian, Kamla Chaudhary, Tribhuvandas Kaka, and a couple of ministers who flew down from Delhi, and they all went to a village. The ceremonial planting of trees. Some of us were in the office, and there was a guy who was sitting in a corner there. And we didn't know who he was. A little later, one of us approached him and asked, who are you? So he said that he comes from the district magistrate's office, and he was slapping a notice for trespassing. Then we started understanding commons more, that it's not just about, it's who owns these lands. That was very hard, early days lessons.
What do you do?
Yeah, so growing up, you always look at commons in terms of infrastructure, right? In Bangalore, whatever is left of the lakes and the parks and roads and bridges, and that's how you normally relate to commons. And I think throughout education, schooling, college, it's not something that was very well thought. It's not something that I learned or something that I understood before I started working for sure. And I think the first time, strangely enough, when I encountered something to do with common good, public good, and when I really had to think about it, was when we started the foundation. So, I started working in a social enterprise, and at the time, I think you understand enterprise well enough. By the time you graduate, you understand, what's whose. But I think when the question became that, we want to start it as a foundation, we want to raise philanthropic capital, a lot of the thought process at that time was around, okay, so you want to do R&D, right? Who owns the R&D? Who's paying for the R&D? And strangely enough, it was something which was not physical, for which the first time we encountered this challenge of, who should own it and why it should be owned. And if it's philanthropic driven, yes, philanthropy is supposed to be used for societal good in many ways. And therefore, we started using the term open source R&D lab, open source R&D, what works, what doesn't work, that should be common knowledge, right? And that's the first time that I encountered it from a common knowledge, open source type of perspective, more in terms of what we were generating as knowledge itself within the foundation, and who was paying for it and why it needed to be open source. And I think from there, more and more, I think every year, I would say over the past 15 years, that understanding of commons, whether it's through collectives, whether it's through cooperatives, whether it's through common good infrastructure, and especially in areas of health and education, is where it becomes very real, given the kind of questions that you're being asked. So those were kind of, I think you never really end up learning everything about it, because it's something that can keep evolving their understanding in different levels, in different fractals. What is common in a certain unit, and as you keep zooming out, what happens, whether it's household well-being or livelihoods or education or health. And so given that we primarily focus on climate smart solutions, but really the goal of climate smart solutions in itself doesn't make sense, unless and until it impacts people, right? Unless and until it's actually catalyzing livelihoods, it's catalyzing healthcare. So I think that's where we really need to confront some of these challenges, some of the models that we work with. So I'll expand on and further deepen.
I think it's very interesting that the first answer itself very clearly from both of you really lays out the spectrum of how many different ways you can approach that word commons. There is a physical form. There is it's about how you go about doing it. Who is part of the process? It actually encapsulates the whole spectrum of things, which I think we'll be happy to develop as we go along. But thank you for also just putting it out there in terms of that whole range of topics that we hope to cover through this whole process. So just to come back to you, Jagdeesh, I think even when you were talking about commons, right? There are so many different nomenclatures by which gets referred to by people. Is commons the same as common pool resources? Is commons the same as common property resources? Is commons the same as wastelands? Everybody is using it in very different constructs, and each of these constructs come from, with your work you've very clearly shown it's not just natural. There's a deliberate reason why certain things are called or connected with commons. So I think if from your work over the years, if you could just tell us the similarities and differences between these usages when it comes to commons.
So, going back a little again, when I tried to understand what commons was, and the so-called project was initiated in several states, it was very common in India, though they didn't use the word commons. In Orissa, you had Gramya Jungle. If you go maybe around, Gramya Jungles would definitely be a couple of centuries old, princely states. In Uttarakhand, then Uttar Pradesh, it was one panchayat, which was more of a 1920s, 30s kind of an act. And if you go way back into Brandeis, who tried to develop the forest policy of India, even there was a recognition of community forests, looking at one resource system. So it's not new, and it's not probably in the urban English language, but locally many people develop their own words. So the distinction, I think, in the way the vocabulary developed, even the International Association for Study of Commons, what we call today, was initially called International Association for the Studies of Common Property. Much of the language centered around property. And then it took about 8-9 years for Lynn and several others to unravel it. And they realized that there is one thing called common pool resources, forests, pastures, water bodies, and so on. The other thing is about how it is governed. What are the rules, regulations? And that is the common property regime. Interestingly, both are CPRs. Yeah. And neither of them is common property resources.
Right.
Yeah, that's which is in India at least, it's used quite a lot.
Yeah.
I think that kind of academic understanding did not go into popular, so we continue to use common property resources, but it's actually two. And to explain it slightly more, you can have a forest which is governed by the government. Yeah, it is a common pool resource system, but the regime is government regime. You can have the same forest, which is co-managed, co-governed by the community, the whole village. That is a common property regime. You can have the same forest managed by a zamindar or a well-meaning person, individual. So you have a common pool resource, but individual regime. So that's the distinction we need to make.
Right. So where does wasteland fit into this?
Colonial legacy, all of us know that, which could not be taxed or it was not worth taxing. So that's how it became wastes. Even in, I'm told, in the larger United Kingdom, even there they have wastes. So they were not, and they call it wastes, wastelands. So you go further into the definitions. There are different kinds of ownership of resource systems. One is what typically most people know, and that is, we all know why. Over centuries, the property laws around individuals became clearer and clearer. And then the state and the governments annex these lands, and you have also, government land. And then you have some places, very clear legal places, where like a Gramya jungle or a one panchayat, the land has also been given to the community as a whole, not to individuals. Yeah, those are the clear collective lands. These open access resources, which are typically government owned, not forests, but
grazing
outside,
lands
are generally called as wastelands. And if you see any state, you will have revenue wastelands, uncultivated wastelands, some 20 categories of wastelands, broadly, which cannot be fit into agriculture. That's what their thinking was, and therefore the taxation. So most of these wastelands are typically de facto commons, most of it, I won't claim the whole of it, de facto commons, but not de jure commons.
So what kind of occupations would be on these de facto commons? Like if it's not agriculture, if somebody has to imagine, then what are those wastelands used for? Are they actually waste?
Plenty. Like you can collect your mud from there to, on the walls you do it, or the flooring you do. That's one very clearly recorded right in Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act. You can go that far. You can go into, of course, the more common one is livestock rearing, which is very, very clear. I think the other important one is a ecological function, hydrology. Without that land, your dry land agriculture, the groundwater levels would be not so great in terms of regulating the water supply. And there are different kinds of medicinal plants, ethno-veterinary plants, fiber, almost like a forest, like a tree thing. This could be forested, this could be scrub, this could be like pastures.
Yeah, fascinating. So, I mean, like so-called wastelands are not actually wastelands, but just because you couldn't tax them, you put them in that category.
It is actually wasted land because in India you will have somewhere around 13-14% of the land mass, which is not being effectively governed and managed. The so-called productivity of these lands could really be enhanced if only we had that a kind of a form of an institutional setting where it is not only governments or not only individuals, somewhere in between. If villages were given more custodial rights, if not ownership right, then you can answer many of the problems that we are facing, hydrology, biodiversity, climate, through those lands. So we need strong leadership. It's a state subject. So again, there are issues. A strong leadership to bring these lands into some nice name.
Correct. So let me move from the physical space, the land, forest, all that Jagdeesh has been talking about, along with the framing that both of you did, that it's not just the physical resource, it's much more. But I think if from your work, Huda, where there is one, of course, there is this abstraction of commons, which we've unpacked right now. But energy is also, for most people, a very abstract. Is this the energy that I need to pick up my dumbbells every morning or to go running every morning? How do you link these two together? How do you link what is the concept of energy commons when it comes to really discuss it? And it becomes very interesting because so much of our the climate discourse, the climate change discourse, just getting access to electricity is centering around energy. So how would you link both of these, and what is the idea of energy commons that if you could share with us?
So when we first started working, we were working with households and with livelihoods. Now here, a lot of the questions that we would get asked would be, is it viable? Right? Is it viable at a unit level? Is it replicable? Can it be scaled? Like, can banks finance it? What is the ROI? Right? Those are the questions that we would get asked. Possible to answer. You can say that, at a household level, okay, somebody's using kerosene versus XYZ, and if they shift to a, cleaner source, which they own and run and maintain by themselves, this is the ROI. Similarly, if let's say there's a woman who wants to start a bread making business. Now, if you give her a bread making machine, which is already packaged with solar, but if you give her the bread making machine, within 3 years, it breaks even, given the business. she will go for it. It doesn't matter to her whether grid is there, not there, whether central, mini grid, all of that doesn't matter. What matters to her is the reliability. Similarly, if you look at a street vendor, for example, for the street vendor, it doesn't matter where the energy is coming from. Energy can come from anywhere, right? But that 4 hours of super reliable energy is what matters. And because of the cash flow, street vendor prefers paying a daily model. Now, what happened was, as we started looking at larger infrastructure, right? Like, let's say, for example, I want to look at a solar powered cold storage unit. Now, very often, you want to do it with a collective, you want to do it with a cooperative, you want to do it with a farmer producer group or things like that, right? So it's better owned, better managed, better benefit for the community. Now here the ROI question was something which again we really needed to confront with the common good word and the term, because you cannot calculate an ROI based on the actual business.
ROI is return
on investment, right? You cannot calculate it based on the actual business. You'll need to calculate it based on, okay, it's a common good infrastructure. The same way you finance roads or bridges or whatever. You don't calculate, it's not breaking even, but you're looking at a long-term good, right? Yeah. Which is almost generational in many ways. So let's say if, whether it's, poorer families or, people living in remote areas, they would have access to common good infrastructure to store their produce. Then in that case, they would be able to send their kids, for better education, or there would be a longer term benefit here. It's the same way that, even from an education or healthcare perspective, right? Like, how do you look at the ROI of saving X number of babies? You can't. It's at a society level, it's at an economy level that you're looking at the benefit. You cannot measure the benefit at a unit or a business level, right? You're measuring the benefit at a much broader perspective, right? So things like, the livelihood examples are more larger infrastructure. So whether it's things like water pumps that are not used by individual farmers because they're seasonal, very often they can be used by multiple farmers. You can only break even if it's used in a collective manner, And similarly, other things which are more, low hanging fruits, or which are obviously common, are things like street lights, panchayat buildings, temple systems, like things like that, right? Where a lot of it depends on the governance and the existing models. They can of course be catalyzed, be strengthened using certain energy systems, but very often it all depends on, it's one of the most complex things to crack, things like streetlights or panchayat buildings. The maximum number of non-working systems, ownership, governance, right? It's much easier to do household livelihoods, even collectives where there's good governance. But the moment it comes to things which, should be common infrastructure, which everyone should benefit, it's the highest number of failures. You travel anywhere, you will see, batteries missing, panels bent, you will see, it's not working over a period of time, right? And there's a reason for that, right? But it's much more complex to crack common good energy resources, right? Even things like mini grids, for example, and we've worked on mini grids quite a bit, and I actually want to say that we've failed in places where we've assumed that community will take ownership. But in places where there's an institution, like a religious institution or a sugarcane cooperative or something which is already functioning, where someone's already, adding this to the portfolio of what they're providing as a service, as a common good service, in those places it ends up really working or functioning well. So both, like the 2 points, I think one was about the ROI itself, and measuring a return on investment from a common good perspective is it's not understood very well. It's not done very often. It needs a lot more work. And the second is really how we can leverage on existing strengths that work from a common perspective. Because for energy alone, when we are trying to do it, it doesn't make sense. There has to be some one of the models that you mentioned that should be working or could work, when you want to add energy as a layer. A lot of learnings to be had from the drinking water models as well. But things like that.
No, it's actually very interesting, because I think both of you are actually pointing out very clearly that there have to be some underlying conditions available for both. How do you actually work with commons or recognize commons, and how do you actually allow for collective action to deliver public goods? Could be social, it could be economic, it could be institutional, all of which is coming up. So there has to be some situation that needs to be ready for it or developed in some senses. And I think that brings me to, Jagdeesh, back to you to say that the moment you go online and put down the word commons, the first thing that comes is the seminal work of Elinor Ostrom, which you spoke about, who challenged the idea of tragedy of commons. And I think this idea of underlying conditions required to be able to counter that tragedy of commons, or does actually the tragedy or tragedies of commons occur? How relevant is that even today? That binary that we are talking about, that necessarily something which is public, which I have, you put the responsibility on somebody else, I'm not going to take care of it. That leads to a complete dysfunctional system, versus something that you feel you have a role to play in, whether it is at the village level or any other level. You tend to take responsibility of it, even if it's not ownership. So how relevant is that in today's context, in today's work that you're doing, especially with the kind of threats that are increasing when it comes to existence of commons itself?
I'll come to the threats part later, but I think it's interestingly, certain kinds of commons are kind of getting eroded. And at the same time, other kind of commons are improving. The new generation commons, like say Linux or Wikipedia or Creative Commons. These are, other kinds, and from the new generation people. It's not even invented by us. So that commoning is very much intrinsic to the society. Yet the resource systems are being challenged in a different way because of certain processes that were unleashed some 10 centuries ago. Either it's too much of reductionism or too much of linear thinking. Those are, I think fundamentally we will be struggling with how do you align modern notions of property law with customary notions and very formal customary notions of property or custodianship, which some people contest that they don't think that it's property. The indigenous people in particular. So that is one frame. The second frame is the modern notions of institutions and the customary institutions. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, but that is that alignment. So you have one side property, you have the second side institutions, which keep getting evolved. So again, going back a little, even the institutions of, say, Gramya Jungles or One Panchayats or Brandis thinking probably were not a true recognition that there is a socio-ecological history. It was, in a way, a pragmatic movement towards managing conflict. If at all everything is annexed by the queen, then there would be too much of resistance, so you give away certain. So maybe the kings also did the same thing. So it is for that and devolved economic governance that people moved in. If you say what are the threats, I would say the threats could come from the politics of land or any resource system. What is the economic motivation of that? If we can frame this as the community forests, pastures, water bodies, energy, as an equally good economic proposition, probably the threats would reduce. Unfortunately, in the way economic analysis progress, it is only monetary value which is counted, not the true economic value, which is not necessarily monetary. So maybe there is a need for that economic theory to evolve. There is also a need to bridge academic life, I think. If you see this International Association for Study of Commons came about only in early 90s. That was a true realization that it's not individual and there is something happening between individuals which needs to be studied. Immediately thereafter, around the same time, the systems thinking people were into big play, Donella Meadows and all. They saw reciprocities, interconnections, interdependencies. And that it is not only this reductionist theory or linear progression. So there was that kind of a parallel thing happening. And you have, what is it called? Center for Social Ecology Systems or something like that, where people were bridging social issues with ecological issues. And that field of thinking is progressing now. So there are threats and based on the threats, there is the other kind of a progressive thinking also, which is happening. So how can we address issues which unfolded 10 centuries ago and seem like a project which was in the happening. Now, how do you rebuild those processes now? And the solutions may not be exactly a rebuilding the past. We'll have to think in a different way. Like even in the British enclosures, they started off with individuals' agricultural lands. After the harvest, they used to become commons. And that would be left for pasturing. That's how commons theory came in. So maybe here we'll have to think about moving slightly away from the centeredness around property into collective action instruments with a range of property possibilities. There could be government, there could be community, there could be individual. What works best where? In fact, Lynn Ostrom's, I don't know if she has finished the paper, one of that was that there is no panacea. In certain enabling conditions, governments do better. In certain conditions, collective action does better. In certain, individuals do better.
I'm sure you've tried this to ground this in some place. And if one has to really... So the conceptual clarity is absolutely critical. But if from the point of view of how you've tried it in a place, is there any... Even if it's through, it went halfway, not in your decades of experience, I'm sure you've tried to ground it somewhere, right?
Not only us.
Yeah, but many people, yes. The idea of I'm sure. But I think from I think links to the question that I was going to bring to you as well. That there are so many diverse issues around energy access, energy justice, all those kind of things which are very local, which becomes a prime individual need in a particular place. Now, obviously, when you're trying to do something for, like, tell an individual that you need to generate energy not just for yourself but for 30 other people. How do you actually go about it when the natural resource governance or property regimes don't even allow for it? So I think from both your experiences, whether it is from the point of view of getting collective action on natural resource commons or from energy access, I think if you could illustrate some specific examples to let us know how good, bad, ugly it looks like, because I think there is an individualization from externally and an individualization from internally from the communities as well, and that needs to be navigated.
I don't know if it makes sense, but I want to give the examples of how some of the social enterprises, they're structured as enterprises because I don't think there's any other better way for them to structure just in terms of the kind of investment, etc., that they want to raise. But at the same time, and I don't know if this makes sense or it's connected to commons, but I do see that the more further away from urban English speaking, that we get, the much stronger the connect or the community cohesion or the community understanding or even the environment understanding gets, right? I mean, just as an example, so some of the enterprises that when you travel with on the ground and when you work with them, if you go for a technician's wedding, for example, right? Like all of the 300 guests will be his clients. Like energy can't not work, right? They will be promoting local recipes. They will be promoting Yakshagana, which is a local art form, right? And I think for someone who is traditionally educated or somebody who is has done whatever, gotten their degrees, etc., to come into that, they don't understand it. And because you mentioned systems, I think people are a lot closer to what's happening, what's changing, how it needs to change. I also feel like people that are coming from certain backgrounds where you have no option but to make things work for common good, right? It's a survival mode. It's not even, you have to have some incentive or driver, right? There has to be some, either a fear if it's connected to, something to do with religion, or there has to be some kind of an like a benefit that is driving society. Like without this, it's not going to work, right? So I think somewhere a lot of the examples of social enterprises or different alternatively structured enterprises where the profits are not really going into shareholder pockets, so they're not going into mid-management or management. They're actually profits are distributed through the employees, or they're distributed to benefiting the end user one way or the other a lot more, right? So things like that. I mean, other good examples that I've seen. Of course, there are plenty of bad. Like other good examples are places like Sirsi, where everything is run in cooperatives. Like I was amazed how that place has grown. I don't know, something has happened where they've cracked. Even the petrol bunks are run by cooperatives. So it's like, and it's a very equitable way, growth pattern or model, right, that you don't see very often, right? And of course, there are other sporadic examples of how things have happened. I mean, since I gave the examples of streetlights, and that is one of the easiest thing when people talk about common good infrastructure. There is one really good example where it's worked out very well, like Amasbel, for example. It's one of the first 100% solar villages, right? And here you have this incredible panchayat, you have the trust, you have the citizens, you have this body that really comes together, that plans, that really ensures that they are unlocking resources, that they are ensuring that it's benefiting people, that it's maintained, and they put in systems to ensure that it is used and it is benefiting people, right? So there are examples like that which are replicable, but I do feel why I brought up the thing of it is very people driven. And somewhere I feel like even understanding, forget running and managing commons, understanding commons, I don't know, I feel like the more we get formally educated, the lesser our connect to that goes for many reasons.
But for the example that you took, what made it happen? So like if somebody wants to draw some principles that, okay, I can use this and I can, try it out somewhere else.
Yeah.
What about that place? It could be that it may not work any other place because it was very homogeneous, it was very unique.
Sure.
But I'm sure there is some learnings that you've drawn to use in other places.
No, whether it's a successful social enterprise that's actually focusing more on common good, or it's a cooperative, or it's a panchayat, I think everywhere it's not really the process or the model, but it is the people. It is people driven. Now, in all of these examples, I'm able to narrow down to there is an individual that is driving it. Or there is a group of individuals that have formed. There's this amazing youth farmer collective called Kadamba. It's just incredible the way they function and how they've gotten there, right? I don't know exactly what it is. I think it's a combination of the fact that each of these individuals are a lot more connected to people and the environment. Yes, for sure. That I think is so automatically. I think the ownership and accountability of the people planet problem becomes a lot stronger. I don't think any of these individuals had any safety nets or anything like that. So it's not a thing of, I'm now financially sustainable, therefore I can work on protection. I think it's people who are more connected, driven, and who hold and have accountability on certain problems, which can only be solved by protecting and promoting commons one way or the other.
Jagdeesh, you mentioned that new kinds of commons are coming up, and I think this is that agency of people and the self motivation. It sometimes makes you feel it's still so much worth it, even though the physical resource is disappearing. Like you find solace in this and you strength in this kind of thing, that something will make it shift to the protection of the physical resource as well. In your work or somebody else's work that you've seen, these both energies come together. Where there is a self-motivated social ethos that is there, and it has also delivered the protection and conservation of a physical resource. As it seems like even more better win-win kind of situation where it builds both these things together.
I do recognize that commons are best when they are spontaneous institutions of people coming together. But there could be other incentives which could trigger off that also. Yeah, like the earliest ones that I saw were in Anantapur, South Andhra Pradesh. And I think they came together, some 26, 27 villages. Anantapur, Paryavarana, something. They never called themselves commons. But actually all the 26 plus villages were taking care of their forests, basically the uplands, for hydrological reasons. That's a dry area, and they could clearly see that there's a regular supply of water if you take care of your forest. So these are self-initiated in a way. But say the example of Wade, village republics, state-sponsored. A canal was built, I think, by the government only, or maybe some kings. But then people organize themselves around it. So And even markets, one could stretch responsible markets. I think the undertold or untold story of markets is also how they contribute to social organization. Like, say, I come from NDDB, the milk story. The milk story is all about collective action. The resource is private, your cow, your buffalo, but the management of the institution for economic activity is a cooperative society. And today I think they're calling themselves FPOs or variations of collective action units. The complexity comes when you have this institution, which is, say, the three of us have cows and we come together and form a cooperative. But the fourth person doesn't have a cow, he or she gets excluded. In certain places, that exclusion is undesirable, like if it is a forest or where it is commonly owned by the one. So the modern form of institutions, if they can be like a panchayat, by its very essence, you are born in that village, you are automatically a panchayat. You don't have to become a member. So for the very poor, for women, for them, these resource systems are the only place where they are equal members. Yeah, the Dalits. These are the only resource systems where they're equal. So that kind of an institution, enveloped with these modern institutions, are what is necessary. And even, the point that you raise about modern people, not modern, city people, yeah, sorry about that. The city people are not rural people. I think it's...
You mean all of us, right? I'm a city person.
Yes. Probably we don't use the language again. Even like village people, Indian village people, we don't say commons. I think maybe the Brits call commons. None of us. But in the urban context, I can clearly think of certain ways in which you can connect. Like the Creative Commons Wikipedia is very common urban. All of us put it out in Creative Commons or use Wikipedia. So that kind of a construct is a happening thing. Similar, much closer probably, is a apartment, and I said it 10 times already, I think. The apartment kind of a situation where you have undivided property, but each of you stays in an individual house. Yeah, but the land is owned by the 40, 50, 100 people who own all the apartments. And then the rules and regulations are the welfare association. All the 100 flats come together and form rules and regulations. This is done, that is not done. You'll need a common electrician, you'll have a plumber, the lift rules, regulation. That's what village people also do. Yeah. And if you want to go a little more on that, where would you buy your apartment? Where there is good municipality, where the metro station is there. Yeah, that's where you buy the property. And you also look for good paperwork, which we are calling in village situation, property or tenure. Yeah, even in the village situations, they are looking at businesses like. If they have the forest, they'll get water, they'll get firewood. Something similar like our metro, those kind of things. So it is I think a question of understanding and developing that vocabulary. Otherwise, we would go either excessive government control or total privatization. I think there is a need to put somewhere in between, and it is happening. It may not be formalized, it may not be spoken, but that kind of self-organization is very much. In fact, I think we overestimate the role of governments and privatization. Otherwise, 90% of what we are doing is we talk amongst ourselves and fix our problems.
Correct. It both gives you the understanding of how complex this is, and that there is so much hope in getting this done in a grounded way, in a local way, far removed from all the mess of the city, or far, a different imagination of shared ethos. One of the questions that keeps coming up for commons, and I'm sure it has come to you before as well. As much as we are trying to ground both the protection of a physical resource as well as collective action locally, there is a whole bunch of factors that are taking shape globally, which is basically, and they also are taking the language of commons. So climate change is a common problem. Every country has to take common but differentiated responsibility to grow their forests, etc., etc. Now, in your work, how much does the global policy shifts really start affecting both the collectivizing as well as the physical resource in your work? Or it's too far removed and doesn't even need to be dealt with? Because in both places, the language of commons or shared resource and common property is being used.
We are a globalized world. So what happens? A butterfly flapping its wings somewhere also is going to affect us.
Yeah.
So these are global developments which are definitely, like say for instance, most of the global transactions are mostly, you might have some multilateral agreements, the COPs and the Paris, and those are the global commons, I would say. But the instruments to operationalize them internationally seems to come from markets, which are sometimes disenfranchising local communities and their stake in their own. Because you might own a forest, but someone else might have sold it off for something else. Yeah. Then how do you? So a good, healthy interaction between global and local is necessary. Even within the country, say from the Delhi to a village, there is a degree of communications which are communication is a light word. There is a nested kind of institutions which are necessary. Yeah. Otherwise, this could also be a totally cross purposes.
Do you see any clear contradictions that really come up in this, or has it been smooth sailing according to you? So, for instance, I mean, like you have targets, right, to reduce emissions by X amount of large energy deployment, which may not require a certain amount of collective action. Or for that matter, X amount of area degraded forest needs to be under carbon offset to sequester carbons. That does not come with a defined process. So how do you actually engage with these spaces and bring that the collectivization space, including the kinds of work that you're doing, right?
What we find is very often a lot of the global discourse on climate and emissions and CO2 and even on disaster or SDGs, for example, even when it trickles to a national level and then a local level, we actually find that especially in India, the work doesn't get affected by that. I mean, in most cases, there's a lot of autonomy at a state level and even at a district level, including Panchayat, but there is a lot of decision-making autonomy on to what extent do they adopt it, how do they adopt it, how should they localize it. Like there are broad guidelines and frameworks, but like you're saying, there's no clarity or clear given, do it in this way or do it only or do it report it in this manner. So there is a lot of flexibility for states to take decisions. There is also a lot of flexibility for districts to really see how they localize and how they contribute to that broader, SDGs or the climate emissions or the solar, target that is there. What ends up happening is there is a lot of effort that people need to make to even localize that target or that understanding itself, which I don't know if it's technically that target should have come from the ground, in terms of how it's even being said. But then it does benefit in some way. Like, for example, there are a lot of really interesting examples of smaller states as well that have taken up localizing SDGs, that have created SDG cells, that have, climate change, nodal agencies, etc. Lot of efforts being put into translating language. Now, the problem ends up happening that it stops at language. It's not just about the language, right? It's about other things like localizing culture, ownership models, things like that, which ends up kind of just being not really worked on or focused on at all, right? So I think while, yes, there are things happening which people can say, yes, this is meeting India's this target or this is meeting, the world's target on XYZ. Those are things which are anyway moving. And yes, maybe they get a bit of a boost or some level of incentive to meet that, but a lot of times it's more ground up where action happens than the targets that are set, which are then trickled down. In fact, very often those targets end up being counterproductive to what the movements may be on the ground as well. Let's say, for example, there is a cooperative that's doing amazing work on, financing and scaling solar locally. And then you have a policy which says, this much free or this many for free. And then that creates perverse incentives. You do see, certain things will just drop. But then it comes back to that one way or the other, it'll come back. But yeah, the pace of it gets affected, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively.
And in the climate space, especially the energy transition space, and because your work is so much about the decentralized energy systems, I'm sure this question has come to you, always has come to you. And there's a growing narrative about how the energy space is actually greatly impacting commons. Because large scale deployment of energy systems is on the lands where there are other kinds of how does this? How do you deal with this in your theme of work? Because that really brings the questions of energy and not just the questions of energy access, but also questions of solutions. When solutions start becoming problems, and commons are at the front and center of the whole thing. How do you actually reconcile something like that?
Yeah. So when it comes to large utility scale energy systems, like this is something which very often, whether you like it or not, it is being driven by private, almost across the world, I would say, one way or the other. It's heavily driven by private. There are public-private partnerships, but these are heavily driven by private. In fact, even in India, if you see, in places where the energy is getting more reliable and better, it's actually privatized energy, which is then investing in better T&D lines. It's investing in larger systems. Now, how to sort of protect it has to be policy. There has to be very strong, sound policy, which is allowing you to use what kind of land to what extent, and, making sure that you are doing certain local good as well. Because in most of these regions where you see the larger plants, water is already an issue, and then you need that much more to manage that. And one way or the other doesn't go into benefiting local communities as well. So here policy has to play a stronger role. But from a longer term perspective, what we see is large scale energy, which is, about feeding into centralized systems as well. That's actually end up failing it ends up failing over time, because you realize distributed energy systems make a lot more sense. And that's where you can have the power of smaller collectives or groups or movements to sort of say, this is how I want to. Because the beauty of clean energy or distributed energy is that you don't have to imagine it in a centralized scale. It can be imagined in any way, right from a street vendor all the way to, a cooperative running a system for households or for livelihoods. But so why is it that we have this one solution and then we're looking for where the problem is and then causing more problem, right? So I think somewhere the beauty of distributed is that you can imagine it in different ways and forms and truly look at distributed, not just energy, but also power systems, right? In terms of where the value capture is.
No, that's great. Reflections?
Well, I wouldn't be able to speak about energy systems.
No, but even
but the whole carbon, the climate solutions, and by and large, it gets restricted to carbon, and that's the part of the major part of the problem. Somewhere, it's not only international or national. We pick up the point and then we talk, then it becomes more comfortable. So this carbon-centric discussions on climate might suit certain emission kind of scenarios, but that's not the climate vulnerability we are facing. It's not just the two of us, the three of us have to get together. That it becomes everybody action. And in any which way, more particularly around the carbon, biodiversity, maybe they'll come with water credit, whatever. All these things are again looking at things in isolation. Whereas village people don't look at it that way, even city people don't. When you're there, it's a place-based thing. And what, I really have to understand it more, but what the Meghalaya government has done, I thought it was phenomenal. They just came up with a grant to a village for 5 years or 10 years, I think. If you protect the forest, this is the money for you. It is not like carbon calculation, blah, blah, blah. And the rationale, I'm told, we should ascertain whether it's true or not. The rationale is the cost of reforesting the land is much higher. So incentivize them to protect the forest. Yeah, it's a great reform and an institution in economic governance. Governments can actually devolve all this by incentivizing in the right way. Protect your place and develop the instruments necessary for that. Instead of just leaving a carbon buyer and a carbon seller. And we know that historically, these are not equal arrangements where everyone can sit at the same table and negotiate. There's poor faith from the buyers about the sellers and the sellers about the buyers. So how do you create those negotiating spaces? I thought the Meghalaya one was fair enough.
It's an important, even if you use that as an example to see that there is one form of incentivization. So my next question was about how we've done a lot of collectivization discussions related to the local, the community, or even citizens groups. But how do you get governments to start thinking of it in a collective way, in a much more holistic way? Exactly from the point you're trying to say about how do you finally that policy push needs to come. And I think whether it is for institutionalizing shared sort of responsibility, collective action at one level, as well as ensuring that we see a space not just only from our extractive or our own thematic lens, but much more holistic. Now, in this case, I think it's an important base to actually start, and even if you open it up to say, okay, and one incentive is financial to protect the forest. What more does it come with? What more should it come with? Including both the collectivization at the level of policy as well as what it delivers as an outcome.
Let us try, both of us.
Yes. Let's fly those nice kites and it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Go.
No, I was just building on the example that you mentioned of protecting the forest and some money being given. Now, wherever that money is coming from, maybe it's coming from a carbon source, right? It's very important to look at. Very important to look at though. What is that? How sustainable is that? Because in some areas where this money is being given, it's not really enough to sustain incomes. I mean, it's maybe 20, 30,000, 30, 40,000 a year to protect a certain acre or something like that, right? Now, somewhere you also, because you said also what do you bring in, right? You need to look at the livelihoods one way or the other, because I think what really depletes or really what sort of pushes and pulls people in certain directions is health and livelihoods one way or the other, right? And if that's not stable, if that's not sustained, then that drives you to do things which are not in the best interest of commons, right? So somewhere, in the same model, right, yes, you're working on protecting, but at the same time, what we can also do, and this is something that the Meghalaya government is also doing, where can you support that same family with alternate livelihoods, which actually helps them say, I can afford to protect this, right? I can afford to take care of this. And the other factor, which I think we don't really bring in, is public health. I think whether it's climate or other driven issues that completely move families from poor to abject poverty, it destroys middle class, forget poorer communities, right? So how do you really understand the public health segment better, which is really, and ensure that it is plugged into these models? So I think somewhere in the beginning you mentioned systems. Now, one thing is for sure that very rarely do you find governments that will think in systems, They're mostly siloed, they're mostly departments. You actually don't have climate, heat, health people even talking to each other. They're having their own things, right?
Hyper-specialization.
So there is a huge scope for that, who plays the role of the glue then, right? Because everything is interconnected. You're not going to be able to safeguard common land if you don't look at health and livelihoods of people, right? So somewhere who plays that role of the glue becomes very critical.
Yeah, and the design of programs like possibly the Meghalaya example is doing that already.
It definitely requires probing further, but if it's coming from the senior person, I take it at face value, and it was not from carbon.
Sure.
Yeah, so then, because the next question would be, they don't see any harm in carbon, which is probably their perspective. The carbon money is okay if there is a good institutional arrangement where the real poor are not left out, and it doesn't go off, the major part of the money doesn't go for that verification, blah, 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 those kind of things. So I fully agree. What was necessary the scientific method for academic education, unfortunately became the way of life for public administration, sectoral public. So that was necessary to understand science, but it's not necessary that, public administration has to be in that siloed manner. So if you had to go for framing, what could be the ones? So my mantra would be ecology, equity, economy. Let us frame that these three are to be together. The second would be particularly in view of climate change, and I think particularly about ecological and economic issues, it requires a kind of a distributed, context-specific work. With climate change, it's pretty. Each latitude is going to get hit differently. Aspect, slope, all those things, and altitude. So we can't have a one-size-fits-all. What you need is a frame, say for this agroecological zone or agroclimatic zone. This is the kind of a common framework available. Then you do place-based. Instead of, one topic like carbon or biodiversity, a bundled approach. The last point I would like to say is, before the last point, I think a plural approach is also necessary. Some are, because we all take positions for markets, against markets, for centralization, for decentralization. So a kind of a plural arrangement without comparing, say, legs with hands, but hands and hands, kind of a plurality, then I think that kind of an experimentation is necessary in this, in the way it unfolds. The last point about, the health and psychology, those kind of, for the commons to survive, commons need commons. Like if the village is protecting its forest and is not taking care of its, say, healthcare facility, then sooner than later, the forest will also deplete. So what kind of a decentralized or delegated responsibility could be given to a panchayat or a gram sabha? That's necessary. Otherwise, it will be a matter of time before even the forest fails.
We should come up with a Department of Commons protects commons, no? In the government.
These things that we're talking about was tested in, say, 90s or 70s. The District Rural Development Agency had something similar, bring everything together. We all know what happened.
I mean, it's been great talking to you guys. My last question to the two of you. Anybody listening to us today, if there is one place you want to send them to see this really play out in full throttle, good, bad, ugly, for a great learning, what place would that be? You can take 2 minutes.
Place.
Yeah, place or a person you would send them to talk to.
I wouldn't like to say, I'm looking at the urban person. I would like to show that person right in their backyard. The seed that they, from which the tree grows or the crop grows, that is commons. Vandana Shubha screams about it. So let the urban person also connect to that seed. The knowledge systems could it be patented or will you feel cheated? Your work. Imagine if Einstein, Newton, they all patented this. Then what would be our life? So patenting is a very common urban thing. So how do we push that? What is copyleft kind of thinking? Okay, more concretely, most of our examples will be good, bad, ugly. In a given situation, something might be nice at that point in time, ecologically, socially. Look at the framing of the interactions that are happening, and you'll see it, say, even in the government rolled out programs of, say, watershed development. That's what I'm familiar with. You'll find elements. You'll find elements that everything worked well. But it became too much computerized, and then the soul was lost. Or they did the livelihoods part well, the private land part well, but they didn't think about the wasteland. Or they didn't think about the tenure element of that wasteland. So we could go and try configuring these building blocks and see that it happens everywhere. Otherwise, I have a few very nice favorite places.
Yeah, why not? Along with this, what is that one favorite place you could give an email address or phone number of?
I think you would go to Gadchiroli, you'll find some 200 villages.
Gadchiroli in Maharashtra.
Maharashtra.
Yeah, okay.
You can go to one panchayats. They were good till 2010.
That's in Uttarakhand.
Uttarakhand.
Okay.
You can go to Gramya Jungles in Orissa. And the more recent one that time, I haven't gone there, but is the struggle that the coastal common people are facing in near Kochi. Yeah. But every place is a laboratory.
Yeah.
One is Sitlingi in Tamil Nadu, where Dr. Reggie and Larita are there. I think they started off with, health as an agenda, but they couldn't really do that, right? So it's a complete movement over the years where really you're looking at, one is of course food practices, growing, crop typology, soil, through cooperative work, but, created, farmer producer organization, which, does millets and other things, completely shifted the local consumption patterns, but also run a hospital there, which is for the women and the other local communities there. And, so again, a very interconnected model has taken time to evolve, but definitely one that really looks at systems, commons, as a very inculcated as a default practice, I think, within their work. And the other example is eGov Foundation. So I don't know if you've heard of Digit or the DPI, the Digital Public Infrastructure work that they do, is Viraj and his team. So they've been working really to ensure that, because, given the fact that digital can play a huge role when it comes to commons agency, but how do you then protect? So they've done some amazing work with governments, whether it's on health or on, urban infrastructure as well, for commons. A lot of good grounded social enterprises in Northeast India, in places like Sikkim or, Manipur, where they've been really kind of inculcating certain practices, but it's not really well spotlighted, but they have no other way to sustain and survive. So some examples like that. Yeah.
Super. This has been a lots of food for thought, lots of good mental health Gyan, and I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time and being here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.